Hello and welcome to Punk Rock Academic, the podcast where the rebellious spirit of punk rock meets the halls of higher education. We dive into the stories of those who break the mold, challenge the status quo, and bring the DIY ethos to academia. I'm Alex Yore, and with me as always is Dallas McCulloch, your guide through the intersection of anarchy and academics. Get ready to meet the professors, scholars, and students who are as hardcore about their studies as they are about their music. Let's turn up the volume and tear down the walls of convention. This is Punk Rock Academic. All right, Punk Rock Academic, Ep.7. This time we're talking with C.J. Uy, Ph.D. He's currently an assistant professor of religion at James Madison University in the Shenandoah Valley. His work focuses on medieval Sufism and Islamic philosophy and explores some very deep topics like what it means to know. He has an impressive CV, starting with a BA from Yale's Department of Religious Studies, followed by an M.Phil from the University of Cambridge. He also holds an MA degree from Stanford and a PhD from Brown University's Department of Religious Studies. Aside from his academic pursuits, CJ also plays bass in the DC-based Bad Times Records ska band Kill Lincoln. They have developed a strong following through years of touring and recording and have played with the likes of Streetlight Manifesto, The Slackers, Less Than Jake, and Real Big Fish. CJ first started with the band back in 2015 and became a full-fledged member in 2018. I hope you're all as stoked to hear from him as we are. Let's get into it.
So we're talking to Dr. C.J. Uy.
Yep.
And okay, so I know you from Kill Lincoln, obviously within the music world. That's your thing, playing bass for a pretty rad touring band while somehow balancing out being an assistant professor of religion at James Madison University, which is what town is that in again?
It's in Harrisonburg, Virginia, right in the Shenandoah Valley.
Right on. And I think the as soon as we started doing this, you kind of came to mind. I've met you a few years ago from touring with Mustard Plug, and then you playing with Kill Lincoln. We do shows often, and I remember being at Fest a couple of years ago. I had a Yale shirt on, and I think maybe you were testing to see if it was stolen valor, because it's not too often backstage at a punk rock festival. A dude's got a Yale shirt on, and then we threw out a Bula Bula, and you threw back a Bula Bula. I'm like, okay, cool. And that's when I had looked at your resume, which I joked and said, like, do you play in a ska punk band, or are you like the head of state or a cabinet member? Because your education being from BA from Yale, master's from Cambridge, master's from Stanford, and a PhD from Brown, which is like, it looks more like a cabinet member, I feel. So yeah, I guess I'm stoked to kind of dive deeper on that. It was also weird too, learning that your drummer has a master's from Harvard School of Kennedy too, which is
you got to get him on the podcast also.
Oh, dude, for sure. That was another. He recognized me from an event with the Surgeon General at Yale, which I thought was another just very strange encounter while at a beer garden in Gainesville, Florida. I think we were watching. He had a Comeback Kids shirt or some shit. So, can you talk about what you're teaching as an assistant professor, and then what your actual? I know you had PhD and MA, M.Phil, and BA, but what exactly are those in? Like, what is your research on?
Yeah, so my research focuses primarily in the field of Islamic studies. So I teach in Islamic studies more broadly, and my specific area is medieval Islamic philosophy and Sufism, or Islamic mysticism. My work, in terms of like my writing, has to do primarily with the questions of knowledge and identity. So like, what does it mean to know? How do people cultivate knowledge in texts? And I'm really interested in thinkers that like to break rules and deconstruct conventions. So my book that I'm finishing up now is on a 13th century thinker named Sa'd-Din Hamuya. And he writes basically what I call Sufi free jazz, where he takes all of these conventions of medieval Sufism in terms of like how you're supposed to write a text, what a manual looks like, how diagrams and talismans work. And he basically puts it all into a blender, stirs it up, and spills it out across the page. And the book is thinking about how this text is supposed to work. This was a super influential and popular thinker in his time period. And the idea is, if we can't make sense of what he's doing, then we're fundamentally misunderstanding his entire period, and also what knowledge means to these thinkers working in the 13th century. So that's kind of like my more specialized work. And then my teaching is basically Islamic studies and religious studies more broadly. I teach a world religions class, religions of the globe, this semester. It's like a big gen ed. And then I do more specialized courses, like I teach gender and sexuality in Islam, knowledge and identity in Islam, intro to Islam, Islam in Africa. You get the you get the pattern here. So yeah, it's basically my academic work in a nutshell.
So your undergrad and your master's and stuff, those are just religion degrees in general, or philosophy, or what are those actually in?
Yeah, I've been a religious studies guy basically through and through. So my undergrad, my BA is in religious studies. My master's from Cambridge is in, I guess I would call it Asian and Middle Eastern studies, but I was working on a 10th century kind of like Islamic Neoplatonic encyclopedia, and my PhD is in religious studies as well. So yeah, just religion guy all the way through. So you asked about like, yeah, being a cabinet member or something like that. No, don't want to discourage any future students of religious studies, but I've basically done religious studies so much and for so long that this path into academia, being a professor, was like the only thing I really saw myself doing, especially after the M.Phil especially.
That's cool, and it's rad that your actual research does tie in with music, but in a very different way than what I know you for. I mean, you're touring with Less Than Jake. You're just out with the Suicide Machines. It's more the world of ska-core generally. So, totally. I mean, it looks fucking rad. Thank you. Playing in a band with Mike has some perks. So I'm just wondering, what is your initial exposure to music then?
Yeah, so I guess maybe it's kind of embarrassing. As a kid, I remember loving like boy band pop music. My first show that I ever went to was like the Backstreet Boys or something. And it wasn't or something.
Oh, yeah.
It was the Backstreet Boys. But then, yeah, yeah, it is what it is. Love the Backstreet Boys. Millennium is a killer record. But then I think it was around age 11. I know it was age 11 because it was in 2001 when Blink put out Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. That really opened up a whole new different kind of genre of music to me. So I started listening to Blink, and that same year, System of a Down's Toxicity came out, which kind of like really radicalized me, both in terms of music and I guess thinking about like American Empire and critiques of, like a whole bunch of stuff. So once I heard those two records, I kind of took a deep dive into the world of punk and metal. So like on the Blink side, I got really into NoFX. I listened to a lot of AFI, Rancid, and then like older stuff like the Misfits, Dead Kennedys. And then on the metal side of things, I went a little bit. It took a little bit of a while for the metal stuff to kick off, but then I heard Rust in Peace for the first time when I was 13, and I was like, "Holy shit!" It like absolutely floored me. Like
We know
Marty
it very
Friedman's
well.
guitar work, especially. Yeah. It was just like it blew my
fucking
mind.
Marty Friedman, Dave Ellefson. Yeah, that's a stacked lineup.
Like it just like the entire record, like no skips front to back. It's like absolutely insane. So I listened to that, and then I think the next year, like from 2003 to 2004, all these sick metal records came out, basically right as I was coming into high school, like Lamb of God, Ashes of Awake, Mastodon, Leviathan, Amon Amarth, Fate of Norns, Black Dahlia Murder, Unhallowed, right? Like I think
Detroit's finest right there, baby.
Released Tape Crew Death Roll. What's that?
I said Detroit's finest right there, Black Dahlia Murder.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, like, so all these records came out, and like, that's basically what I was doing throughout all of high school, was like listening to music. I started playing guitar around age 12. So it was like sitting down with those records and just like learning the riffs and just like getting as deep into this music as I could.
And it was a cool era, I think, that we grew up in, because it's, if you were watching TRL waiting for them to play Backstreet Boys, you were going to sit through some. There's going to be metal, there's going to be punk, there's going to be rap, there's all this sort of stuff. So I think it's a very common thing for people to. It was, you couldn't just stay in a little narrow bubble or lane. Like, you were exposed to a wide range of things that you're going to connect with that, I think a lot of people right now wouldn't have stumbled upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was how I first heard of Blink-182 when, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket came out. And it was like either the first date or the rock show music video was on MTV. And I was like, oh, holy shit, this is awesome. And even MTV was playing Headbangers Ball throughout the 2000s.
Yeah.
And especially late middle school, early high school, I was like flipping that on, and like tons of sick bands. Were coming. It surprises my students. I do in my world religions class. I teach a unit on like Satanism and Norwegian black metal, and I give a kind of history of death metal and thrash and all these things leading up to the kind of early '90s black metal movement. And I talk about Headbangers Ball and some of these bands that were getting airtime, not quite black metal bands, but some of the extreme metal bands. And it's completely perplexing to them that some music like this would be on mainstream television just for people to sit around and watch. And you might say, because we don't really have as much of that anymore, most of the kids have like never heard of these bands before, just because they're kind of, you can find them if you want to seek them out, but they're not really as much in the mainstream consciousness these days.
An interesting religious overlap I had recently. I was tour managing Authority Zero, and the bass player Mike, he's Christian, and very progressive strain of Christianity, obviously. But I was talking to him. I said, that's fine if you're Christian, but you got to recognize, like, Satan has way better music than Jesus. Slayer's way better than Stryper. And he was like, yeah, but all those satanic bands, they're just quoting the Bible, dude. Like, straight up, like, it's just a Bible story. I thought of like Creeping Death by Metallica is literally just a fucking Bible story, front to back, of the most brutal, awesome thrash metal possible. So much of this music is actually shaped by religion.
Absolutely. And this is, one of the things that I think about a lot studying religious traditions. I mean, I'm teaching actually an upper level experimental course right now called Love Supreme Music and Spiritual Discipline. And so many of these traditions have such rich kind of musical worlds to dive into, right? Like, yeah, you think of like some of these bands that want to bring in religious themes, but also the traditions themselves have some like really intense and often brutal, often brutal music. Some of the brutality stuff isn't really coming in right now, but like if you listen to like Sufi Qawwali music, it's super intense. Or I mean, even like Jewish klezmer music. There's a kind of punk klezmer band out of Leeds in the UK called Tance. And like, I've listened to that record front to back so many times just because like the melodies, the rhythms, the energy is just there. So yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't really expect maybe these traditions to have like these kinds of musical worlds opened up. But I think if you know where to look or dive in, you can definitely find it. And yeah, not to mention, I mean, a lot of the satanic stuff is satanic, but I mean, they're drawing in many cases from Christian conceptions of the devil, like they're pulling from Christian theology and folklore and also like esoteric type text. Like these, I would say, are actually part of the broader world of Christianity that they're often pulling from.
The irony in that one. So when did you first start going to shows?
Backstreet Boys when I was like 9, right? That's the same thing. No, I mean, a lot of it was early high school is when I started going to shows. I was going to see a bunch of metal bands, go to places like, like Rock and Roll Hotel in DC, of course, like 930 Club was a big one. Jack's, it was called Jack's out in Virginia, and then I think they changed their name to Empire eventually. So I was going to a bunch of shows early high school and all throughout high school, and then I started playing in a death metal band in high school and would kind of play shows around the area at that time as well.
So your first time ever playing a show was in a death metal band?
Yeah, we were. I mean, it's kind of like death metal, deathcore type of thing. We really wanted to be like Black Dahlia Murder, basically. So a lot of kind of like Gothenburg style riffing, and we wanted to have like the alternating low
Yeah.
and high vocals and stuff.
You sound like Death Clock.
I'll go back and yeah, exactly. Like basically sounding like that. Like yeah. I think at one point I like learned the little sweepy guitar solo for Duncan Hill's Coffee and stuff. So yeah, Death Clock also huge influence there. But yeah, that was basically the thing we're going. Yeah, we were all right. I think our claim to fame, we I think opened for Amon Amarth once as like one of the local bands, and that was like huge for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you idolize Swedish metal, Amon Amarth is a pretty fucking good band to open for.
Oh yeah, I saw like watching them live where he pulls out the big horn full of mead that he's drinking, and like they got the long hair, and it's like all the Viking song. Dude, I was floored by that when I was in high school. I thought it was awesome.
+2 gauntlets, a battle axe, a bag of holding, all the proper Dungeons and Dragons equipment.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, I always loved that stuff as a kid. I think people don't reckon, or maybe other people don't feel this way. Like it's silly. It's kind of silly, right? Like you're singing about Vikings. You got the shirt on. You got the gauntlets. You're drinking mead out of a horn. But that's kind of the point. It's awesome, right? Like Cannibal Corpse is silly, right? Eating back to life, hammer smashed face. Like it's like watching a good horror movie. There's gore, there's shock value, but it's fun. It's kind of tongue in cheek, and it's entertaining. So like I love that stuff.
Very much so. And so I'm especially mentioning Cannibal Corpse, Hammer Smash Face. If you follow Corpse Grinder, he is the most just kind-hearted, just teddy bear of a man, like devoted father. Like it's, and I think that kind of ties into this next question I'm going to say is so. And I think I know the answer based on your resume here, but like, were you a shitty student? Like, did you find punk rock and metal and then just start doing heroin and dropping out, or did you maintain good enough grades to get into Yale?
Yeah, I mean, I was always a good student, and I really what it came down to was I just liked to learn about stuff, and I was lucky enough to have teachers and to be in schools where that type of thing was encouraged, even if I was kind of poking the bear a little bit or asking uncomfortable questions or pointing out like there seems to be a weird point of tension in here and what's going on. I remember, and I'll definitely shout out to my high school teachers, them really taking the time to sit and talk through these things or encourage me or give me other things to read that could kind of spark and really foster that curiosity. So I very rarely had situations where I'd be sitting there and being like, whoa, what about this other thing? Or like, this doesn't sound right. Why are you having us do this? And someone would say, well, because I said so, or that's just how things are. Usually they would take the time to explain or say, yeah, actually, that's a great question. We can go into it. And that type of response from the teachers I had made me even more enamored with learning. And I saw it as something that was not at all kind of contradictory to or in tension with the types of things that I was interested in like punk and metal worlds. And like, there's also weird types of connections. So like Protest the Hero has a song on Scurrilous about the story of Solomon from the Quran, from, the Quran. And I knew really nothing about Islam when I was in high school. I just loved the song and stuff. And now years later, this is like one of the things that I'm working on. And like, the first album, not first album, the record Fortress, again, Protest the Hero, has tons about the invasion of the Mongols in the 13th century. And like, that's literally the period that I work on now. And I read about all the Mongol stuff. So all of these things in terms of like musical stuff and the educational stuff that I was into in high school and even back as far as middle school ended up kind of flowering in really weird ways in my current career.
I mean, it's cool too. Like with Protest the Hero, of like I didn't realize that you didn't grow up like Muslim or anything. It was you listened to progressive thrash is what kind of taught you some of these interesting stories, that exist, and that's kind of turned into what your profession is.
Yeah, it's I guess a kind of a strange route that happened, but I mean I remember hearing the songs and reading the lyrics and listening to them and kind of opening to this world and being fascinated. Like, oh, what did like I want to learn more about this. I want to read more about these stories and kind of just see where it goes.
Cool. So Kill Lincoln, you were not an original member. I remember seeing them before. Well, what year did you join Kill Lincoln?
So I started filling in with Kill Lincoln, I think around 2015. They were doing a big kind of cross country tour across the U.S. And the original bassist Marty, who I was good friends with, or am good friends with, and we kind of worked together at a music school. He couldn't make a lot of the dates, and I was kind of in between degrees, chilling out at home with a lot of time. And yeah, I went on tour and filled in and basically played all the dates that he couldn't play. So I started filling in 2015, and then officially joined around I think probably around 2018.
And at that point, you were working on your PhD by the time you actually joined them full time?
Yeah, by the time I fully joined, I was the PhD was in full swing, and luckily, I mean, we'd been playing a few shows here and then on weekends and things, but luckily, when the band stuff really picked up, I was actually just about finishing up with coursework. So I was, I guess, like in the exam stage or the early like comprehensive exam stage, and before writing the dissertation. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I had a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to travel and play and do all that stuff.
So I'm wondering, so your focus research wise is really specific. Was this something like very intentional that you went for, or was it? I mean, at least my grad school journey so far has certainly been guided in a lot of ways, and led me to a place that I didn't necessarily think I would be. Was that the case with you, or were you really sort of focused on this field?
Well, the field in general is something that I've been interested in since undergrad. And as a bit of a backstory, I came into my BA having no idea what I wanted to major in. So I think my first semester I took like advanced conversational Spanish, physics, calculus of a single variable, and intro to the Hebrew Bible. And all of the classes were interesting, but I found the Hebrew Bible class to be just the most fascinating one in terms of like the content, but also the approach, the methods we were using. I thought it was all great. So the next semester, I took a similar kind of range of courses. I think it was like intro psych, econ, Spanish again, and then I took the New Testament course. And again, New Testament was like most interesting.
You just dropped physics and calculus just like that.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, the problem with physics was I thought at one point that I maybe wanted to be like a theoretical physicist or something, but the problem was my math wasn't good enough. Calculus, I did well in the course, but I knew that was going to be my math ceiling. I had to work really, really hard and it didn't feel very intuitive to me. So I was like, okay, this stuff is really cool conceptually, but it's going to be a huge struggle. But the semester after that, I decided to kind of go through the religious studies course catalog, and I took Intro to Islam. And again, I had very little familiarity with Islam before that. And the course was fascinating. And especially when we got to basically the thing that I do now, when we got to medieval Sufism and read this figure named Ibn Arabi, who is kind of like the grand, his nickname is Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest sheikh, the greatest master. When we got to him, it just completely blew my mind. The staggering erudition of his work, the kind of command of tone and genre and style, and the just kind of super far-reaching exegetical and metaphysical vision. Just it was like nothing I'd ever read before. And basically, after after I read Ibn Arabi for the first time, I was like, I need to do whatever I can to read more of this stuff and do more of this stuff. So I took all of the Islamic studies courses that I could at Yale. I went to Jordan to learn Arabic so I could read the texts in the original. I wrote my senior thesis on Ibn Arabi, and then I started a master's program, not to work on Sufism. I did a little bit more Islamic philosophy and a little bit earlier, but it was the same types of questions that I was interested in, from that first meeting with Ibn Arabi have kind of, I guess, like haunted me throughout my entire career. So, he wasn't the subject of my dissertation, but one of his close colleagues was, and I talk about him a lot in the text or in the book. So, yeah, in terms of the specific focus of the dissertation, I knew I didn't necessarily want to write on Ibn Arabi because there's been a lot of ink spilled on him since the 13th century when he was alive. So I was poking around to find similar thinkers that approached questions in a way that would scratch that itch. And then I found this guy, Hamuya, my supervisor, said, well, given what I know you're into, you should check out these manuscripts. So he gave me some of these texts to read, and I took them home and pored over them for about a week. And I was like, yeah, this is it. It's like all the crazy Ibn Arabi stuff, but turned up to 11, so to speak. And it just really sucked me in. I mean, it was extremely frustrating to read and really difficult stuff. And I had to learn Persian to read this guy as well. But ultimately, I found it really kind of intellectually rewarding.
When Kill Lincoln had really started blowing up more so from a smaller DIY band with Bad Time Records really kind of taken off. About Can't Complain came out in 2020. And around that time, putting out Catbite came out shortly after. They've done quite well for themselves. And it seems like your team of, Mike, your singer, and then having Brent do a lot of booking and promotions and stuff has really gotten you guys with, bands like the Suicide Machines working with you, and Mustard Plug and Less Than Jake. And so I guess it just happened to work out well that you had some downtime right as the band started really touring a lot harder.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out well in the beginning, especially like when we started really touring harder. It was right when I was in the dissertating stage. So I'd gone. I took a trip to Istanbul to kind of go to the archives and read all the manuscripts and stuff. Basically, right before COVID happened, and we were recording "Can't Complain" right when COVID hit, and we were like shuttling back and forth from Mike's place to Ryan's studio, kind of washing our hands compulsively because they hadn't told us about masks yet. Mike's fingers were kind of bleeding, tracking guitar parts for the record. It's pretty surreal experience. But, right after things started to pick up again and we started to tour, it was actually then that I started this new job, really, in 2021. So yeah, right before COVID, things were picking up and getting steam, but then I was kind of thrust into this situation where the band is touring a lot more. We're getting these really awesome offers, but now I have this assistant professor job and all these teaching responsibilities while I also need to kind of research and put out new material. So that's kind of been that's kind of, how I've been for the last few years, is trying to figure out, well, how do I juggle these pieces in a way where I can do justice to both? Because they're both things that I really, really care about. Like my academic work, I love to teach. I love working with students. And I also love playing with Kill Lincoln. I don't want to be in a place where either one is kind of suffering because of the other. So it's taken a lot of planning and a lot of hard work to figure out how exactly to strike that balance. And I'm still actually kind of working on it a lot.
It seems like the key to finding that balance is a 2-word answer: Ricky Weber, the man, the legend, Mr. Ricky Weber.
Yeah. I mean, Ricky has been a godsend, really, like in terms of filling in. He helps out a lot. And one of the things that's great is I've spent a lot of time trying not to be a bass player that sounds like someone on guitar, just like, you know, just faking their way through, because I really do conceptualize them as different instruments that have different roles, different approaches to kind of
especially
melody
in
and rhythm and
ska.
feel and all this other stuff. Oh, absolutely in ska. But at the same time, a lot of the types of kind of licks and patterns and approaches that I'll take come from, the background of someone trying to learn Marty Friedman solos and be like Yngwie Malmsteen and watching Paul Gilbert educational DVDs to learn how
Mhm.
to shred. And Ricky has watched all of that same stuff and listened to all the same tunes and learned all the same solos. So I think, when he fills in, a lot of the parts seem to come really naturally to him because we're drawing on that same kind of fount of shared musical vocabulary.
I mean, Ricky is a shredder. For the people listening that don't know Ricky, he plays guitar in We're the Union, and he just was it the 5 out of 5 kids that kill some song like he's like it's a Dragon Force solo that he puts in the ska punk
What was
song.
that? Yeah.
Like you know the one I'm talking about. Like it's just I'm fucking
Yeah,
talking
I mean,
like
Ricky is sick.
absolute shredder. And then he actually just finished college too. He got his degree from Eastern Michigan University. Lives right up the street from me, so I see him around pretty
Yeah.
often. But it's been cool that there's a few times recently I've seen Kill Inc. and it's like I don't know who's playing bass, but it's going to be somebody I like. So that's cool either way.
Yeah.
And it seems like even you've been able last time I saw you guys was at St. Andrews with Suicide
Yeah.
Machines and Hey Smith from Japan and Bad Operation, and
Also
you were
spin
playing that one,
and
but
spin.
but I was in the crowd hanging out with Ricky, just like watching you guys play, and I'm like, oh, you're just hanging out. I was like, oh yeah, I start the tour tomorrow. Like, so you just got to teach class. Like, you fly back, but it's like he's still hanging out and drinking beers and shit. We're discussing the Lions and watching you fucking rock. So it's like seems like a very cool, positive, supportive situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of that set, Greg from Bad Op lifted me up onto his shoulders, and I like tossed the bass over to Ricky, who finished like "Good Riddance to Good Advice." So it's like it's awesome to have Ricky to be able to fill in, and I mean it's also part of this broader Bad Time network that really Mike has basically built up from the ground, where we have so many awesome musicians and genuinely cool, supportive people who we can have kind of fill in, and like I don't want to say pick up the slack, but if someone's really got something to do that they can't mix, there's a whole world of people we can kind of call who are super eager to help out in whatever ways they can. So like having this community here is one of the things that actually makes it possible for me to balance these two sides of my life. So yeah, shout out Ricky. Like Ricky's been a godsend.
So you'd mentioned like sometimes in your religion class discussing, but Bathory and stuff to people or discussing metal, but beyond that, like do you find other ways that coming from, I guess more so that DIY punk rock community has impacted you as a professor?
I think so. And a lot of it is perhaps a little bit more abstract and conceptual. But one of the things that drew me to both punk and metal music was this basically just like a critical questioning of received, what we call it, like a critical questioning of received ways of knowing and being, right? Basically however things are, how people tell you they should be, the assumptions that we kind of operate on and never think twice about, both musically and conceptually. I was always drawn to punk and metal because it seemed like it was always interested in questioning and breaking down those types of boundaries and bonds. And we were just talking about bands like Amon Amarth, and often the ways that those types of boundaries are questioned or challenged, or Cannibal Corpse or something like this, is in a really tongue-in-cheek, perhaps an ironic, sort of playful way. So this playful self-reflexivity and willingness to stretch boundaries or deconstruct certain types of essences or assumptions was something that was interesting to me for punk and metal music, but it's also basically what I do in my career. I work on thinkers who fundamentally force their readers to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about what it means to be, basically, like, ontological questions of what is reality, how do we know about it, what are the boundaries between ourselves and the others that are around us. These are the questions that my research is really focused on. And my teaching as well, they're the types of things that I try to get my students to question and think about. So it's the highest compliment that I get when a student comes out of, especially an upper level seminar, but sometimes even the gen ed classes, and they'll say, this class really taught me to see the world in a different way, or to ask questions that I never even thought about. So this constant seeking and questioning and pulling things apart and examining them in ways that people would consider before is something that I think cuts across both my musical life, but my academic life as well. No, I was going to say, it was actually not until during the PhD that I thought about putting those things together, though. Very much, I tried to live a lot of my life where I separated my academic self from my musical self. Like I wanted to cleave myself down the middle, and like academics were serious and kind of fraught. And what it's like being in grad school. There's a little bit of suffering involved, and music was always something kind of fun and playful. And it was actually my PhD supervisor, his son is an amazing musician who went to Berkeley. He asked me, like, have you ever thought about bringing those two parts of yourself together? They seem to be really important to you, and it seems like there's some overlap there. So have you thought about it? And at the time I was like, no, these are really separate for me, and I don't like to mix them. But as the dissertation went on, I kind of let myself tear down some of those boundaries, and it ended up opening up really interesting research dimensions for me that flourished into basically a whole new avenue, and basically the new project that I'm working on now. So I thought about, I'm looking back now and seeing how there's tons of similarities in terms of the interest that cut across punk, metal, and my research, but it wasn't until the last few years that I actually was able to think about them as being in conversation.
That's cool. And especially the aspect on, I guess, especially within the DIY scene, the idea of fucking, you can do shit on your own. You don't have to do what you can trailblaze a little bit. And I think that very much ties in with the idea of picking what you want for your dissertation, what your research subject is. Like, it's the same mentality of, you need to you pick what it is you're going to do, you work your ass off at it, you get it done. It's going to be something awesome. I think that applies on whether it's DIY music or higher academia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, especially as someone who works in the humanities too, you get to pick your topic, you get to just delve into it as far as you want. But also, I mean, I was fortunate enough to have an amazing supervisor who really encouraged me to make it my own. He said, it's like, what is it about this thing that you find interesting, but also what about your own approach to seeing the world, or the concerns that you have, or the interest that you have, instead of trying to shy away from that and try to fit into some groove or some idea of what the research is supposed to look like. He really encouraged me to lean into that and said, do the stuff that you find interesting and that makes you tick, bring it to the material, and that is what will make a compelling and an interesting project. So like, very similar ethos across those two worlds in that way as well.
Absolutely. So one question I wanted to ask, and this is nothing to do with anything we've discussed thus far, but like, as you know, Alex and I are both just we're straight white dudes, and our podcast has been, it's a white dude, 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 and that's overwhelming, especially with the metal scene you're discussing. That's the case for sure. Ska has always been quite a bit more diverse, even looking at huge bands, No Doubt, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Fishbone. It's been considerably more women and more people of color. And just hoping, maybe, I don't know, if you could speak out to how playing in a ska band, is it more, I guess, normal as a person of color, or it seems more accepted or warm sort of thing, as opposed to being within the metal scene? It's not diverse in any capacity generally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't I mean, yeah, like I guess in terms of statistically speaking, that is the case. Especially the modern ska scene has been very. I mean, not even the moderns, like historically speaking, as you said, the ska scene has been kind of open to diversity and really thinking about diversity and the kind of political implications of it as a kind of core of the music. The metal scene, yeah, not as much. But to be honest, the question of identity, not again, this is going to go abstract because this is typically how I tend to think about things. But the question of identity is one that I've always found to be intensely fascinating, but also incredibly unstable for me. Right? I come from a mixed background. So my mom is Black American, my dad is a Filipino immigrant. So the question of, well, what exactly is my racial or ethnic identity when you're kind of living between multiple communities like this is kind of a fraught one. So I've this is kind of, I guess, if we want to psychologize it, the one of the reasons I'm into these music trends, these research topics, these ideas where boundaries are always blurry and fuzzy or constantly shifting or being deconstructed, is because that has generally been my experience of living life, of having a multitude of possibilities in terms of how to be or how to ask fundamental questions of what should a family look like, or how does one respond to grief, what are fundamental values about how you relate to your parents and grandparents and all these other things. Growing up, there were always multiple options that were live answers to those questions, and all of them seemed viable, but none of them seemed like the only way to do things for me. So I guess that's a long way of saying the question of diversity and identity is one that's important to me, but important in a kind of deconstructive way. I'm not necessarily just concerned about representation in terms of like X people from X background or X ethnicity, because all of those categories have always been kind of fraught to me.
I think what's cool for me is because I've been going to ska and punk shows, but specifically in the ska world for 25 years, and I remember it was quite big as a teenager. It got smaller and smaller and smaller, and I would just see the same people there. We're getting a little bit grayer, our backs hurt a little bit more, and then really in the last few years when I started going to shows, and I especially noticed it at Kill Lincoln shows of there's it's there's 18-year-old kids with X's on their hands, not because they're straight edge, but because they're young and they're new into this. And so many people saying,
Yeah,
this is my first time at a show. And it just seems so much more, especially a very large trans contingency or non-binary folk,
yeah,
seeing definitely way more women or women appearing folk, more people of color. And it's been awesome as, just another old white guy thinking like, it's about fucking time somebody revigorated the scene a bit. So that's what's been really cool for me. I like Kill Link. I don't know your music
yeah.
that well, but it's been awesome for me to watch so many people 20 years younger than me they're going to keep this alive when we're dead. And that's fucking awesome that you're inspiring those folk.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, back to now have something more concrete to say versus this abstract, weird rumination on my own, like personal baggage. But this is, I mean, when we're talking about the diversity of the shows, the fact that so many different kinds of people can come to these shows, right? Like you said, I mean, there's people of all different types of racial and ethnic backgrounds. There's trans people, different gender identities being expressed. And for me, it's not necessarily about like checking a number, like, oh, like, look, there's another Black person there, or like, here's someone of Filipino heritage. But the fact that people can come into the scene, that they can come to these shows, and whatever their sense of identity is, they feel comfortable bringing it to the foreground. And also they feel comfortable perhaps experimenting with it and seeing how they want to present themselves, how they want to relate to others who might seem the same to them or also who might seem different. This is the type of question of identity and kind of representation and diversity that I'm really interested in. So what I guess I was trying to articulate before, it's not necessarily about like the kind of stable, like there's these groups and these groups and these groups of people, but the fact that whatever your identity is, you feel comfortable showing up and also being able to play with it a little bit. And that is something that, I would say the metal scene, I think there were some pockets where that was there, this kind of sense of an openness and an ability to bring different dimensions of identity to the foreground and to play with them. But in many ways, especially for bands and parts of the scene that take themselves very seriously, this is, I think, where those boundaries start to come up. And it's like, okay, well, no, that's not metal. You can't do this. These types of people should not be part of it. And the ska scene, I see very, very little of that happening, which has been amazing, to be honest.
All right, so these are kind of our 3 questions we ask everybody, so kind of have a little common ground here. So first off, what's the last thing you listened to musically?
The very last thing I listened to,
yeah,
musically,
like right before this or however recently.
I was listening to the new Chat Pile record, actually, which has been pretty sick so far. Yeah, I just popped it open.
Who are they? What are they all about?
Apple Music. They're kind of like a metally, noisy, very bleak type of band. It's like, it's heavy music, it's aggressive. I don't actually know that much about them, but I've heard the name circle around. I knew they put out a new record, and I've had people recommend it to me. So yeah, this was the morning that I put it on while making breakfast and kind of getting ready for work, and I loved what I heard so far.
Awesome. Okay, now what is a band that you would say is highly underrated, like one that more people should really know about?
I think the Best of the Worst is a band that people should listen to. They're on Bad Time. They're like a ska-core type of band. They put out, I think the last record they put out was Better Medicine, which is just, it's a killer record. They played a bunch with Folly and actually did one of the Bad Time Wavebreaker splits with them. Put on a sick live show. Like I cannot recommend this band more. So yeah, please, if you're listening, check out the Best of the Worst. You will not be disappointed.
All right, the final question. Bum bum bum. Desert Island album. Like, what's an album? Or if you got a handful of albums, you can't just pick one. That's totally understandable. But like, what do you take on the Desert Island?
All right, I'll do a few from different genres. So I think AFI, Black Sails in the Sunset would definitely be like my punk desert island disc, so to speak.
That's a bleak
Megadeth, Rust in Peace
on the desert.
Yeah, dude, but you're on the desert, right? Like, come on.
It's bleak, yeah.
You got something to suit the mood, but I love that record. That one's coming there with me. Megadeth, Rust in Peace is there, and I could probably spend the rest of my years working out all those guitar solos. Sonny Rollins, Night at the Village Vanguard. Huge Sonny Rollins fan. The whole live record is just incredibly inspiring, and it's just sax, bass, and drums. So everyone's out there musically naked, but like the interplay between the musicians and just hearing Sonny stretch out for some of those tunes is something I could pretty much listen to for forever. And then the last one, it would be a pop record, taking me back to my pop days. Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion. Absolutely.
Is that the one with Call Me Maybe on it?
With me, Carly. No, it's the one after that one. And I think it's, Carly Rae, maybe good song. People, if you only know Carly Rae Jepsen for Call Me Maybe, you are doing yourself a disservice. The rest of her output is just amazing pop songwriting. Every time Carly Rae comes through DC, I'm there seeing her play. Like, she top tier pop artist. So yeah, Night at the Village Vanguard, Black Sails in the Sunset, Rust in Peace, and Emotion. And put me on that island right now. I'm good to go.
I just love the fucking diversity in these answers of like Davey Havoc, Dave Mustaine, and fucking Carly Rae Jepsen, dude. It's so punk rock. It's perfect.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, no, there's no irony. I'm not like, I'm going to say it, but like, I love Carly Rae Jepsen.
Yeah.
So
I was just thinking, I just heard Call Me Maybe today on the radio, and I was wondering, I was like, I don't know, like, does she have any other tunes? And
listen to Emotion. You will not be disappointed.
Because for the record, Alex and I have listened to Rust in Peace. So like 30 years ago to this day, we were probably in my mom's basement playing Final Fantasy or some shit, listening to Rust in Peace. Like that's got some play. So we could probably listen to that shit enough in the 90s. We're all right. It's Carly Rae Jepsen sort of evening for me here.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we should be good on this.
That's all we got, I think. Well, yeah. Thanks for being here, Cyril.
Awesome. Yeah, this
CJ,
is a lot of fun. Thank you. Thanks for thinking of me and having me. I know.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Punk Rock Academic. We hope you're as inspired as we are by the incredible stories from the punk rockers revolutionizing higher education. If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow rebels. Stay tuned for more tales of academic anarchy and keep the DIY spirit alive. Until next time, keep rocking and never stop learning.